But I want to go into baseline. So you're wanting to deploy capital, or you want to consider raising capital to do a deal.
Okay.
Where do you go look for a deal? I have some thoughts on like how to go through this process.
This is a whole nother topic, but I feel like everyone's chasing these cap rates and they're looking for, if you start reading and doing some research on what's a good way to buy something, everyone wants these really high cap rates. And then they look in our space and they aren't really able to find them quickly, at least in the scale that they're trying to deploy. And I feel like that's the wrong take if you're just getting into the business, is looking and going, man, I can't find a 12 cap deal in a reasonable MSA, so I'm out, right? I think that if you're looking at it, you should be looking for, there's some really great smaller communities. I feel like that's the problem. People want to go institutional. They want the 100 space community. You have to earn that, and that takes time. And if you look at the 30 to 40 space communities, there's a lot of opportunities there where you can still find those higher cap rate deals and get in the game. And over the years, we've seen a lot of guys come who want to get in the game. They come to chat with you and they don't do anything because they can't find this perfect unicorn in the countryside. And I think it's a bad forecast for yourself, and it prevents you from actually drawing first blood.
I'm going to call this what makes a deal a good deal. Because there's a ton of deals out there, and I agree with you. And yesterday we're in a meeting and I'm like, all right, I like this, but let's scratch the word perfect. Because perfect is a horrible goal when you embark on some type of journey, whether that in this case, this is information. You're looking for a deal. You're looking for a piece of real estate that makes good financial sense. When you're first starting, you want to just be in intake and learn mode, to learn every single thing about the income and the expense and what it's going to cost to manage this thing, how to do it once you get in far enough. And then where is the meat on the bone? Where is the upside? How can you make this deal good? But then I'll backtrack to another guy that I follow for good multifamily. I'll shout out Ken McElroy, and he's a big time multifamily operator. I look up to him as a good example of somebody that's done it for so long that he's just really sharp. And that's where you can't just come in and be sharp and see the perfect deal shining. You have to understand the depth of what it actually is, how much income. But first off, it's the market. What location, what market do you want to be in? And so as much as I'd hate it to go back and like to paint the old rule as accurate, location is probably the most important. So you do a bunch of research and you should select your market. Ideally, you pick a market that has a decent amount of inventory so that you can, if you lean into that market and really get sharp on your research, you can find deals to look at and go through and tour and underwrite and potentially tie up, put in escrow while you go through a due diligence process. You go into the market. I'd say the more growth oriented the market is with a larger population, the better, because you're just going to have more padding on everything. You're going to have contractors. You're going to have choices for vendors. You're going to have more demand for the product in general. There's just so much that goes on with a thriving economy that gives you benefits across every single piece of it. We had properties in rural country outside of Durango, and there was like one guy to do everything. So if you pissed off the plumber, good luck. You got to call somebody in from Durango or whatever. And there's not that many good, hardworking guys in these small towns. So everything's more challenging. And so there's just these like things that we've learned along the way.
I'm laughing over here because I'm realizing how expansive this topic is. And so let's just call this the kickoff, and we're going to have more dedicated one-offs to go through this. So we'll cover some high level stuff, but I'm like, we could talk so much. So if we're looking at baseline, what do you want in a great trailer park? Number one, you just hit it. It's location. You have to have an MSA that's going to provide vendor flow, residents, all the things that you're going to need. Another thing that I really think is important on a first deal is really focus on utilities and getting a deal that has city services
and decent serviceable electrical, where it's not just tunneled everywhere and old. And in Arizona, they literally bury electrical cords. They're wires, they're electrical wiring But nowadays you put it in conduit. Back in those days, they literally just dug trenches and dropped
Like
rubber
burial.
insulated wire in the ground. And so like those things you learn, and we've learned the hard way by bumping into things that cost a lot more than you'd ever anticipate. And yeah, like the location, because the top line, if you're going to break it down like 1, 2, 3, you got to have demand for the product. So like somebody recently showed me a deal, and I try to help anybody that wants to get in the space, and I'll give them a couple of pointers. Then it's like rural San Diego, and it's like, don't start there. If you get real sharp when you understand this town and it's about to boom because of X, okay, but that's still speculative. So you got to take it back. Where's your demand base for this housing? And so the more diverse the pool of people that are going to come in and need affordable housing in manufactured home communities specifically, the better off you are. And the more rent that you're going to be able to charge in the long haul, your rate is going to continue to grow. And therefore your top line and your gross income is going to continue to grow. So our top performing assets have been newer builds. So like the utilities and those types of things aren't beating you up on the expense side. And they're in good locations. So you have consistent demand. Your rental rates can climb consistently. Doesn't have to be home run because, you know, time heals all wounds. You can start to grow and income after 5 to 10 years at, let's say, 4 to 5% bumps. In 10 years, that's 50% more income. And then if you're able to manage your expenses really well, that deal's worth a ton more, at least double, if not triple the value than when you bought it. So you drive top line demand, top line income. So you need a good location. Then you minimize expenses. And that's important to have a pretty deep vendor base. Nobody likes to work in mobile home parks. That's just like a kind of something nobody really talks about.
Yeah.
You really have to build good relationships with vendors in mobile home parks because right now, good vendors, good electricians, plumbers, you name it, they're busy enough with other work and they can cherry pick what types of properties they want to work on. So you need the more people, the better, in my opinion, in a big demographic, a big metropolitan location, 1 million plus. We have a bunch of stuff in Tucson. We're going to do really well with it because of how we bought it. But it's way more, I'd say, difficult to hit huge gains in the markets that only have a $500,000 to $1 million because you just have different dynamics in the drivers of that economy. Where Phoenix, Dallas, Houston, all these big markets, even if they have some different risks, each market's going to have its own risk. But the more people, the merrier, because you're going to have so many more options and you can continue to drive long-term revenue and it's going to grow. And so then you get into, I'd say the third piece is the debt. And so who is a lender for that property? So like my lender, the first thing you do from his perspective is type in FEMA and he looks up the flood map and sees if the property is in flood because that impacts who is a viable lender for that property. And it limits who potentially, if it's in flood, it limits who that lender is going to be. So then that limits your exit. So that impacts even if you hold it for 10 years, that impacts the buyer coming in. You're always going to have this, I don't want to call it like a salvage title car because it's not quite that bad, but it's like a car that's been dinged and repaired. It's in flood. It's going to hurt our loan spread. It's only going to give us, it's probably like 50% of the options from a loan perspective. So your long-term growth is going to have a harder time on the exit. So you want to look at flood, look at your loan options. Ideally, like how we do it now is if a mobile home park does not qualify for Fannie Freddie, call it the agencies, for a non-recourse loan, whether or not we choose to take that loan option is secondary. If it will quickly qualify for an agency loan, Fannie and Freddie, because the flood impacts that, only one of them will do flood. And so you look at the loan options, and if they'll do it, that means that property is in a location that globally is going to be successful. The credit risk from their standpoint, the lender is not as concerned about the long-term performance of that asset, to where it gives you like a quick way to measure the long-term viability of an asset. So if the agencies are like, oh no, quality, size, let's say it's most of the time your lenders, you can lean on them to do $1 million loan amount minimum. That's pretty low. Most lenders don't want to spend the time on it, but if you get into the right mortgage broker, they'll do $1 million to $1.5 million agency loan. And so you buy a deal that's just over that threshold to start, ideally, and or you buy a deal that will grow in value, but the agencies like it. It's just too small right now. So you can do that. You can do the same third-party reports to qualify the lender, or that the agencies use to go through the process. And you can basically prove that deal to be long-term viable for an agency loan, which is the best non-recourse fixed rate product that's out there. For the most markets, they win and they do the most business.
So hold on.
Went on a mortgage rant, but I was firing.
There's just so much, man. So it's sure talking about it's like we have a lot of firsthand experience and pain that comes from this time. Let's paint the picture of who this consumer is. So either it's somebody who has $1 million liquid, or it's somebody who's in the rat race and they want to start making some cash flow into it through some sweat equity. So at the very entry kind of level.
Yep.
And so that person, what are they looking for, right? So we've already established that you have to find a good MSA. Well, if you were just starting today, you would totally buy a non-agency deal in Tucson.
Yeah, but I think that a really important point is to look at the long-term viability of that asset to the agency qualifications.
Okay, so
you should look that up. I mean, probably Grok or ChatGPT can tell you, what is an agency loan on in mobile home parks? It's not hard.
What would be some things that you'd be willing to take on for your first community? Because sometimes, and this is what my first point is, I feel like we talk to a lot of people who make that decision. They're like, hey, I've got $1 million, or hey, I'm sick of working my 9 to 5. I really want to figure this out. And they come to the hangar, they meet with you, they get a tour, then they're all hot and bothered. And then they stop by every 4 months for the next 3 years telling you about all the different thoughts that they have, and they never do a deal.
Okay, so your first deal.
Deal.
So 20 units or more.
Okay.
In a metro that's $500,000 plus. So 500,000 people or 500,000 people or more in the metropolitan area.
Okay.
In a place that doesn't have rent control.
Okay.
Because California is actually a good market as long as you do the research to know that you don't have rent control. Like there's a deal, anyone can buy it. It might still be there. It's in Fallbrook. It's a 50 unit deal and nobody's buying it because it's in California. And people like us don't want to buy a 50 unit anymore in a location like that. It just isn't worth the work effort for us because we're trying to buy hundreds of units elsewhere. But if you're new, that's a great starting point. Maybe too expensive here. It's $5 million, which is why we started elsewhere.
Okay.
So 20 units plus. The more you go into, I'd say tertiary $500,000 population markets, the lower the rent's probably going to start at. So like when we were starting, like you can still find mobile home parks in like the $250 to $500 per unit per month range.
Yeah, we were just talking with the Sunstone guys, and they had deals in like Baton Rouge, and that was kind of like the market there.
And those markets are growing. And so you look at, okay, this is just an old space rent, an old operator that hasn't gotten with the times. Let's say it's $300. We bump into those. And the market is probably all day 500, if not 600 in that same market. There's double the rent opportunity there. That's unbelievable. So as long as you go in, let's say that's probably 30 to 50,000 a unit. So for 30,000 a unit, it's $600K for a 20 unit.
Okay.
Did my math there, right?
So,
yeah.
So let's talk. So we've just established where you would track down and what kind of deal you're looking for. Now,
so then city services, city water provided, from the municipality, city sewer flowing into the municipality sewer treatment plant. You don't want to own that, especially on a small deal.
Hold on. I'm coming back to this. Hold on. Whoa, Nelly. All right. So we've established what we're looking for. Now let's quick talk about loan sizing, because we're going to get into due diligence and tracking deals, right? So what we want our newbie to understand is what can they do with the money? And if they don't have the money, what do they need to raise? So what's loan sizing? Let's just use a 30 space park.
Well, first off, let's cover how do you find deals?
Okay.
Because a million people want to dive into the weeds, but like I'm not kidding. I probably looked at 300 to 400 mobile home parks before I ever bought one.
Okay.
And we would literally sit and people talk about, it's like, I've heard of the dark work where you're doing things when nobody knows you're doing them. Like I used to literally be crawling around LoopNet, which at the time was the popular thing. And just looking at them, doing some high level number crunching on the calculator, downloading some PDFs of their P&Ls, whatever was available, just to get an understanding. You need to spend a lot of time in the financial weeds and looking at potential deals that are for sale. And honestly, to this day, LoopNet's not bad. A lot of weird deals end up there because they're a little bit tricky in different markets. So look at them all. And then you just go through and hammer brokers that are in the space and start getting leads.
Let's dive in on that, because I think that's a mistake a lot of people make, is that they go, you know what? There's this whole group of people who do this for a living all day long.
Yes.
I'm going to completely ignore them and start this myself. So this whole obsession with finding off-market deals, to me, it's like an afterthought. You should start with brokers and making great connections with brokers, because that's what they do. This is their whole job.
And they are working the sellers to sell at a fair market rate. And so like when you go off in the weeds and spend too much time off market, like sending letters, I get phone calls, letters, postcards, all sent to me trying to buy our mobile home parks. And I would never sell to them because I'm going to list it and get a bidding war. So yeah, scratch the off market on your first few. If you want to bolt that on down the road to basically be mining for golden nuggets, these deals that are one off, we've only ever done one, and we've purchased 38 mobile home parks. And that doesn't mean that's how many we've done. How many I've looked at, it's in the hundreds, if not thousands. So only one that was like off market and was a steal. We bought it for like probably a half or 2/3 of what it was worth.
2 sellers, 3 parks. Got your Vegas and the 2 in Tucson.
Yeah, but I knew about those from brokers. Mm-hmm. So we sourced them later, years down the road. So our point is, make sure you start going to every event and make yourself known. You got to set your deal target clearly. Let's say 20 to 30 units. There's a huge need. Like nobody buys those cherry 30 units.
And they're a no-brainer if you're just starting out. You tack them on.
And lenders love them if they're in decent locations, especially city services. And so that's where you start. And you should go to every manufactured housing event or multifamily event, whatever. But you got to define what you're after and then stick to your guns on what your criteria is until you learn to then adjust it over time. But some of the best things we ever did was just be so persistent in our focus. And people told us for, I don't know how many years, 5+ years, oh, there's not going to be any deals in Arizona.
Oh, they still say that.
And they're not wrong in bulk. But if you focus in Arizona, now we know every deal, like a deal that comes around, I typically know the name, know roughly the space count. I know of the seller because we've been so focused in that area. And so you need to go really deep in your knowledge base and I'd say the persistent long-term focus of that 20 or 30 unit that's in a good location, because they're around and they'll come up. All right, if you're enjoying this content, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, and check out the description below for our websites listed. Thanks a lot for joining.